We are committed to creating a safe and supportive space for our guests and listeners, and to provide information and tools that will help our listeners understand, manage, and overcome trauma. We understand that the healing journey can bring up challenging emotions. Therefore, we want to warn our audience that certain episodes may contain discussions or stories that could be triggering for some individuals. The content of the podcast is for educational and informative purposes only, and we encourage you to practice self-care and discretion while listening, and to reach out to a trusted support system or professional if you feel overwhelmed and need help on your healing journey. So, Amanda, welcome to today's podcast. I'm excited to have you here, and we're going to be talking about kind of it's an interesting topic, but it's a tough topic.
Yes, absolutely.
So you are a trauma recovery mentor, and as I was just saying a few minutes ago, I love that title. I mean, it just pretty much says it all. So you help people heal from trauma. I love it.
Absolutely. And the reason I call myself a mentor is because coaches, a lot of times they can coach you through something. A mentor will come alongside you and hold your hand as you go through it.
I like that. Yeah, I'm kind of changing my thought on that too, because definitely mentors are coming alongside you and supporting you. And yeah, to me, it feels more like you're going to get more support from a mentor than a coach. So I agree with that. And the subject we're going to talk about today is human trafficking, and you are a survivor of that.
I am.
And so tell us about yourself. And then the two questions that you gave me, which, like I was just saying a few minutes ago, are really great, is what is a definition of human trafficking? Because we all need to be on the same page and understand what that definition exactly is. And then the misconceptions, because I'm sure there's a lot.
There are a lot. Oh my gosh. I have compiled a list. I actually have a whole Q&A video now available on YouTube for people that are wanting to dig in more into the myths versus the truths. So who I am now is completely different from who I was even 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. So now I am a grandmother because that happened last year.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. As of 2 years ago, on Friday, I will have been married for 2 years to one of the most amazing men in the world. So I'm now a very happy wife. I have this amazing life. I've got a wonderful child. I've got 2 beautiful stepkids. I've got 2 grandbabies, both born in the same year last year. Yay. That's who I am now. But who I was is totally different person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And what I love is that you started off on that, because it gives everybody hope, because this is for everybody. Right?
Right. Right. Mm-hmm. And something like 60% of the world's population is going to experience trauma in some way.
Yeah.
And you can't really compare traumas either. So when people hear me tell my story, the first thing I want to say is don't compare your story to mine. You cannot set my story up on a shelf and give it a title like this one's the worst. This is the biggest one. This is the best one that I've ever heard, because then we have what we call trauma trophies. You don't get gold ribbons for this.
Ooh, trauma trophies. We don't want trauma trophies. Ooh, right. I haven't heard that before. I like that.
So human trafficking. Mm-hmm. So with most survivors of most victims of human trafficking, one of the common themes is an early childhood abuse. That's because it sets you up to be of the mindset to think that this is something that's normal. Mm-hmm. But what a lot of people don't realize is about all of these myths and stuff. Everybody thinks about it only happening to kids, and it's this kidnap scenario where somebody's snatched off the streets. These are completely wrong. And the movies get it wrong. And even the documentaries get it wrong. Mm-hmm. If you break it down to the very basic definition, the Department of Homeland Security defines human trafficking as the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain commercial sex acts or labor from another person. There's no mention of transportation, so you don't have to smuggle somebody from one place to another. A lot of people are trafficked from their own home. There's no mention of age. One of the oldest people to be pulled out of trafficking here in the Colorado in recent years was in her 70s. The youngest was only 3 months old.
Oh my God. Oh.
There's no mention of money, even though it says commercial sex acts. That does not mean prostitution. Prostitution does not mean human trafficking. About 95% of all people who are in prostitution are being trafficked, but one does not automatically mean the other. There's no mention of who it is that's doing the trafficking.
Mm-hmm.
No mention of being kidnapped or, snatched off the streets. That's because if you were to snatch somebody off the streets, the first thing they're going to do is fight for their life, right?
Right.
Yeah, I know I would have.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But trafficking doesn't require you to be snatched off the streets. Most of the time, about 95-98% of all trafficking cases are where somebody is being trafficked by somebody they already know and trust and love, and that has a sense of authority over their lives, whether it's parents, grandparents, most are significant others, boyfriends and girlfriends. They're familiar.
Mm.
It's a whole lot easier to get somebody to do what you want them to do if they already trust you.
True. True. Whew, that is frightening. I did not know that. I did not know that. I know from my experience, what I've learned about it, I have spoken to a local nonprofit here in San Diego that gets the girls off the streets. And what infuriated me is hearing the story of how they get these, and it's not just girls. She works with girls, but this doesn't just happen to girls. It happens to boys as well. But for this purpose, we're going to talk about girls. And that is, they'll go to the shopping malls. They'll look for the group of teenage girls. They'll look for the one who has her head down. And then that is the one that they target. And that is the one that they befriend. And that is where the trust begins, because all of a sudden this girl has this wonderful boyfriend who is just being great to him. And as soon as the trust happens, that's when things change. Right?
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
Sickening.
they go in this with a long game.
Right.
Right. It'd be a whole lot quicker if they could just snatch somebody off the streets and make them do what they want. But the last person that trafficked me, I knew for 7 years before the trafficking began.
Whoa.
And I say the last person because I was actually trafficked 3 different times. It's another myth that when you leave a dangerous situation like this, that you're out for good. But when you build these neural pathways in your head, believing that all this stuff is normal or worse, what you deserve, then you're going to allow it to happen over and over again, even if it's completely unrelated. I was trafficked 3 different times. The average number is 7.
Oh my God. These statistics are frightening because that's what I thought too. I thought, oh, they save the girls, they get them out and they rehabilitate them, and they're good to go after that. Because of course, that's the stories that you hear. You're not hearing about all this dirty stuff here.
Right. And there's so much around that too. I went to a Christmas party last month, and one of the first questions that somebody asked me when they found out that I was a survivor of trafficking was, who rescued you?
Ooh.
So who rescued me?
Yeah. Who rescued you?
If we break it down, the first time I was trafficked, it was by a boyfriend who was more than twice my age, who loaned me out as a party favor for his best friend's birthday. Who rescued me was nobody. I went through 52 hours of repeated abuse, and I got myself out afterward. I had to wait until all of the events stopped so that I could get my stuff and get out. Nobody rescued me. Nobody came for me. The second time I was trafficked, I will say there is somebody who rescued me. His name is Richard Dean Anderson, and he played MacGyver in the 80s. I watched a lot of MacGyver. I love the show.
Gosh.
And I love Richard Dean Anderson. I've written to him telling him that he was the inspiration behind my Great Escape story. And I've never gotten a response, but I have to trust that he knows.
Oh, yeah.
I've seen everything the man has ever done because of this. I'm now introducing my husband to Stargate.
That's funny.
So the third time I was trafficked, the person who trafficked me was a police officer I was engaged to be married to. And like I said, I had known him for 7 years before he got me there. It took him 7 days once he did to start trafficking me. And I was there for 152 days of my life. It was the most difficult thing I'd ever been through. And nobody rescued me. Nobody came for me.
Oh my God.
One of the big things that happened to me was in early 2018, I went to an anti-trafficking event, a big conference out here. I was sitting down in the front row because I was all about let's save the kids and let's stop these kidnappers. And I didn't understand what trafficking meant. And when they had a panel of speakers up there and they started breaking it down and describing what it was, I realized that I'd been through it and I wasn't ready to admit it yet, but I had been through it 3 times and I wasn't ready to admit to it yet, but I needed help. And the next year I was made famous on a pornography website, which 85% of all modern pornography is made using victims of human trafficking.
Yes.
And when I discovered this, it was because a man asked me for my autograph in a grocery store. And it completely destroyed me. Shortly after that, I lost my job because my employer found out that I was a survivor of trafficking. I would scramble trying to find anything I could. I reached out to a couple of different anti-trafficking organizations. One paired me up with legal services pro bono to be able to help fight the pornography. And one set me up with a therapist. And I went to the therapist and said, I'm tired of slapping a Band-Aid on it and sucking it up and moving along because it's not working. I don't want a Band-Aid. I want a shovel.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Couldn't have said it better myself.
Right? Nobody rescued me. And in most cases, nobody does. Less than 2% of all victims survive.
Less than 2%?
Less than 2% of all
survive?
Victims. Yes. Most don't get out with their lives, and their lifespan is only 7 years in the world of trafficking.
Oh my
on average.
God. And I know, the scary thing is too, that I heard is that the sex traffickers or whatever, human traffickers, make more money doing this than they do selling drugs. And their chances are less that they're going to get caught. Excuse me, they're going to get caught doing this than they are selling drugs.
That is true in a way. So there's a lot of overlap between human trafficking and the drug industry, because a lot of people are forcing these people onto drugs so that they have a chemical dependency on the person how to supply them.
Right.
Can't just leave.
Right.
There is still more money made in drugs, but human trafficking is quickly approaching. As far as the prosecution goes, from 2011 to 2021, the number of people here in the U.S. who were prosecuted doubled. So that's helping. That's getting us somewhere. But the prosecution doesn't necessarily make a conviction.
Ooh, right.
Very
That's
small.
True.
Yeah. So a small percentage of the people that are prosecuted are actually facing time for their crimes. And that's because we have this whole human trafficking definition as being defined as using of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain commercial sex acts or labor from somebody else. But how do you prove force, fraud, or coercion? We're not talking about chains and ropes on people's wrists. And anytime you see that, that's somebody that's just begging for your money.
Right. Right.
Unscrupulously. So you have to take that into account.
Right.
How do you prove coercion?
Right. Right. It's not an easy thing to prove at all. And so it almost sounds like that definition needs to be tightened up a little more so that it, opened up a little more, or
that. And
written.
The state laws are different across the board.
That is true. That is true. And it doesn't become federal till they do take them across the line, the state line, and then it becomes a federal issue.
It can be at that point.
Supposed to be, I thought.
It can be a federal issue before that point too, depending on what else is occurring.
Okay.
So, but then you have to have local law enforcement and federal law enforcement working together. And how often do we see that happen? So it takes cooperation from all these different agencies. And a lot of times when you see these big sting busts with like 163 people in Idaho arrested on a sting operation, think about who's being arrested. You've got the people that are soliciting, right? You've got the people who are being trafficked, and you've got the traffickers. So the people who are soliciting, their punishment is usually kind of a slap on the wrist. It's $80 to $120 fine, depending on what state you're in. It's about the same as driving over the limit line at a red light. Then you've got the people who are being trafficked, who now have a rap sheet and a record and need to be bailed out. And you have the traffickers. And again, we come into the problem of not being able to really hold them because you can't really prove force, fraud, or coercion unless there's chains and ropes on somebody's hands, and that's not there. So those people are getting off scot-free.
Mm-hmm.
So these big sting breasts now with 163 people, 3 of them just walked because those are the traffickers.
Mm-hmm.
100 of them just walked because they just paid an $80 fine. Now you've got all these people who are being trafficked that are now in jail and they're getting bailed out. And who do you think's bailing them out?
Yeah.
And now they owe them more money. And where do you think that money is going to come from?
Oh, see, these are the things that we don't even think about. We don't even think about them. That's why I wanted you to be on the show, because I wanted to hear all this stuff. As hard as it is,
Hmm.
it's the reality of the situation.
Right.
Oh my God. So what do we do?
The only thing that we can really do is dig in, find out what laws are coming up to legislature,
Mhm.
and go and petition the courts to change these laws. You know, we need to protect the victims, not further victimize them. We need to get involved with
Yeah.
organizations that are actually doing the work and be able to vet them to figure out which ones are doing the work.
Mhm.
You know, it helps when you come across one like Compass 31, when they have a seal of transparency on their website. You can see where all of the money is going.
Mhm.
You can hear testimonies from survivors. You can see that they're actually doing the hard work.
Mhm.
But then you have these other organizations that are saying we need $32,000 to run a mission in another country so that we can pull these kids out. They're focusing again on human smuggling,
Mhm.
child trafficking, and a small minority because that's what draws the headlines.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
they can elicit more money out of their donors. And they're taking the stories of these victims of trafficking and they're passing them along without giving anything back to the victims who had to live through this to be able to have the story in the first place. And when you pass the story along and you're doing this just to be able to get more money and more sympathy,
Mhm.
it's further exploitation of
Yep.
the victim.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I'm just thinking about these poor victims. So they get arrested. I mean, first of all, they're in human trafficking. They're being forced to do things that they don't want to do. They get arrested. They've done nothing wrong, technically, really, but the police don't know that. So they get arrested and then they get a rap sheet.
Right. Right.
And let's top it off with they're probably at some point addicted to some kind of drug that they have given them to make them dependent upon the traffickers.
That is often the case. It wasn't my case, but that is very often the case.
I had no idea. Like I've heard a lot of stuff, but I had no idea on this. And what's frightening is here I am thinking I'm safe because I'm older.
I
Right?
was
So
31 the last time I was trafficked. 31 years old with an established life of my own.
So what did you do? Because you've done a ton of healing, a ton, right? I mean, clearly your life is so different. So what did you do?
When people get out of these situations, it's very similar to that of domestic violence. People think that that's when you're safe, you're out, you're good. That's actually the most dangerous point in someone's life.
Right.
So when I first left, the last time I was trafficked, I was in Scotland. Like I said, I'd known the man for 7 years. He was a police officer. I saw him as safe. He asked me to get a fiance visa and move over there to be with him. And when I got away, it was 152 days. I had lost 70 something pounds. I was deprived of food, deprived of sleep. I was waterboarded, all this just for sport or because I hadn't done something that he asked me to do. So there really was physical and literal torture.
Oh, yeah.
So
Oh, my God.
I was thin. None of my clothes fit me anymore. I got back to California and I was looking for anything that I could just to kind of hide from that.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to deal with it. And he came looking for me. And I saw him knocking on the neighbor's door one day. He had my address off by one number.
Oh, my gosh.
And then I was so new there that neighbors didn't know who I was. So they couldn't tell him where I was because they had no idea that I don't know. I don't know what you want and I don't know what you're looking for. She's not here. I don't know anybody by that name. And it was great. I moved quickly.
Yeah. I was going to say that was an intervention.
Yeah.
That was a God divided intervention. I mean,
Absolutely.
seriously.
Yeah. So I moved again and again and again. At this point, I've moved 43 times in my life. I just hit 44 last month. So that's a lot of moving. I'm kind of done. And I told my
Yeah.
husband that too. So at first it was all about trying to avoid it.
Mm-hmm.
But this man kept on hunting me, and he figured he couldn't find me in person, but he could find me digitally.
So let me ask you a real quick question. Why did you want to hide from it? What was going on in your head? What were you thinking? Why would you want to hide from it?
There were incredible amounts of self-blame because I didn't prevent it from happening. I'd also grown up with a mom who told me that if something kept happening to me,
It's your
that I
fault.
was the common denominator and I had to be the one with the problem. I was making it too easy. I was too impressionable. I was too weak. I wasn't strong enough. But what really happened was I was molested when I was 4.
There you go. There you go. There it is.
It left me vulnerable. Nobody
Yep.
was there for me then.
It's almost like, sounds terrible, but I wasn't sexually abused, but I've worked with a lot of sexual abuse victims, and so many of them feel like they are just marked. The first time that they are sexually molested, abused, they are marked, and then they experience more.
Right. And that's going to be your life. That's what your life was meant to
Right.
be. Because
Becomes your
somebody has to
identity.
do it. Right. Yeah. And I was molested again and again, 12, 13, 15, 16. I was raped at 17. It's not a surprise that I ended up going after these men who I thought were safe.
Right.
And would turn out to be predators.
Right. It's what you knew. It's what it sounds weird, but it's what you were comfortable with.
Yep.
Because that's what you knew. Right. You're familiar with it. Right.
Yep. And you build these neural pathways in your brain that make you repeat these patterns.
Correct.
Yeah. And thankfully, because of all the patterns that I had experienced, I personally started secretly studying psychology. I didn't tell anybody I was doing it. When I went to college, it was for physics of all things, which I hated. But I did it because I grew up being told that I was ugly and stupid. So I modeled for Harley Davidson too. And it was all just to prove a point. I didn't do it because I wanted to. I did it because I needed to.
I love it. I love it. Prove them wrong.
Right. Yeah. That's what it was all about for a long time.
And and more importantly, proving to yourself that they're wrong. That's the most important part, right?
Yeah. That was a big part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when I did get out, I went on the run for a long time and I was constantly hunted. And he sent all these photos and videos and stuff that he later used on the pornography websites. He would use these in emails to send to bosses and friends and anybody that he could find me associated with. And he alienated me from everybody that I'd ever known. After 14 years of living in Los Angeles, I had nobody left.
Oh my God.
So I picked up and moved to Colorado. It's time to start over somewhere. But if I hadn't made the move, I wouldn't have ended up with the therapist that I had. I wouldn't have ended up healing as much as I did. I never would have met my husband. My life wouldn't be what it is now. Sometimes you really do need to just move on.
Seriously. Yeah. Yeah. That's true in my life. I know for a fact that's true, that certain decisions that I made that were big, life-changing, I didn't know it at the time. And it was really uncomfortable and really difficult. Some of the most difficult decisions I've ever made. But once I made them, doors opened up and my healing excelled.
Yeah. And it's a beautiful thing when it happens.
Yeah.
I my therapist for about 1.5 years. And at the end of that was when I wrote my autobiography. And then I wrote all that in 30 days in December of 2020.
Oh my gosh, in 30 days.
And it's not a small book. It's 350 pages
Holy
in a
cow.
Word document.
Wow.
So
what is the name of your book? Because I didn't have that written down. So tell us what the name of your book is, please.
It is called Custom Justice.
Ooh, Custom Justice. That is a big book.
Yeah, it's not exactly big, large print either.
I'm so impressed.
Thank you. But after that, when I got done writing it and I had editors working on it, my therapist asked me, "What are you going to do next?" And I said, "I have no idea." She said, "I want you to try to paint." I told her, anytime I've ever tried to paint, it looks like a multicolored snowman laying on his side melting. I don't know how to paint.
That sounds just like me.
Yep. She said, "I don't care. I want you to paint. I want you to try." Yeah. And paint what you're thinking or feeling or expressing, anything that you're wanting to paint. Just paint it. All right. So she sent somebody over with canvases and paint brushes and paints and anything that I would possibly need. And within 3 months, I sold my first piece. Within 5 months, I sold a piece of art to an anti-trafficking home for survivors in Chicago. And the Chicago Tribune wrote an article about me. And within a year, I had sold my artwork internationally and was invited to be in a gallery. And just this past year, I had my first ever solo art exhibit. And I just started painting in 2021.
You just do it. You just, okay. And you just do it. And you don't waste any time. I am so impressed. That's awesome.
No sense in dragging your feet, right?
I guess not. Wow. Well, and you know, and what that also tells me is you're in your gift. You're in your passion.
Expression.
Mm-hmm.
Expression has always been my passion.
Mm.
So
Interesting.
writing has always been a big thing for me. And I used to love art as a kid, drawing and stuff, not painting.
Mm-hmm.
I was a terrible painter. But I always joke that I learned how to cook out of self-defense because my mother was a terrible cook. And that's a lot of that is true. She hated cooking. She did not have a passion for it.
Yeah.
I needed to have a sense of control over something in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're cooking, you can control how much flour or sugar or salt goes into a recipe.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have control over anything else in my life.
Yeah.
But I had control over what I was eating, and I could feed my soul. I could feed my body. And this past year, I published my first ever cookbook.
Oh my gosh. What is that called? That's awesome. Yep. Show us that one too.
That one is called Surviving in the Kitchen: Recipes for
Aww.
Life, Love, and a Full Stomach.
That is so cool. Oh.
That one was a lot of fun. It was a passion project. And while I was writing it, I made sure to dedicate it to my husband because he's my guinea pig.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm married to an angel myself, I'm telling you. I mean, he's my safe space. He's my normal too.
Yeah.
He's my normal. You know, I had a conversation with and what I mean by that is I had a conversation with a friend who, you know, she brought up that it's hard for us to connect, and it's hard for others to understand what we've gone through who haven't experienced it, right? There's
Right.
no way that they can understand it. And sometimes, you just want validation. And I realized that, of course I did that. And what my husband is to me and my normal is I didn't have a normal, so I can look to him and I can see what is normal and gauge myself, especially when it comes to kind of the family interactions and the relationships like that. I've learned a lot from him because I didn't have that normal.
Right.
And I didn't know where that line was.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And how do you have healthy relationships? How do you have healthy boundaries for people?
Right.
Because that's something normal people do.
Right. Oh, boundaries was like, I had no idea what that. I didn't learn about boundaries literally till I was in my 30s. I mean, I knew what boundaries were, but I didn't know how you applied them in your life. I had no idea. And again, with, people who are victims as children, our boundaries were just crossed over. So of course we don't know what that looks like.
Yeah. We weren't allowed to have boundaries.
No. And our boundaries were trampled over all the time. And so, and I know for me, and you tell me if this is true for you as well, is that really building that relationship or creating that relationship with yourself is key.
Absolutely. Yeah. You need to know yourself before you can truly know anybody else.
Right. And you can't give what you don't have.
Right.
And that was something like I didn't even know what I liked and what I didn't like because I had spent a lifetime calling myself a chameleon and being proud of the fact that I would change myself so that you would like me and you would accept me, and then go to the next person and be what I thought that they wanted me to be. And these people never expressed this to me. This is just what I did. And so the day that I realized I didn't know who I was, I've been on the journey finding out who I am.
Did you ever watch the movie Runaway Bride?
Oh, yes.
There's a part in the movie where he screams at her, "You don't even know how you like your eggs."
Oof.
Yeah. Because every single time she was ever in a relationship, she liked her eggs however they did. This guy liked omelets, so she liked omelets. This guy liked them poached, so she liked them poached. She didn't even know how she liked her eggs. And I have this bizarre history. So when I did find a therapist, that organization, it was one of the hardest steps for me was to go to a therapist, because when I was 15, my parents took me into a therapist. They had no idea what was going on with me. They didn't know half of what I was living through at that time.
Did you not feel safe to tell them?
Oh, heck no. My mother was mentally and emotionally abusive. My father was physically abusive. My brother was the one who molested me.
That's right.
So when I was 15, all of this stuff had been happening so much. My mother absolutely convinced me that if there was something wrong with my life, that I was the one to blame.
Oh, that's right. There was something wrong with you, so they had to go and get you fixed.
And she had taken us into a therapist when I was about 4, shortly after the abuse first happened to me, because something was wrong. And they took me into the doctor. They took us both in. And the doctors told my mom that my older brother had ADHD, and they put him on Ritalin. And they said that I was fine. I didn't need it. Well, about a year went by. She had been giving me my brother's medication every day, breaking it in half for a half dose. Took me off of it for a couple of days, took me back into the doctors with a drug withdrawal. And as a 5-year-old with a drug withdrawal, you're kind of pinging off the walls. You're chattering. You can't shut up. Your hands are going 90 to nothing. It's like a big person with a drug withdrawal in an itty bitty package. And they said, yes, there's something wrong. We're going to give her some Ritalin too and see if that helps.
Oh my God.
So at 15, I took myself off of the Ritalin because I had started running away. I did not take the pills with me. And I realized that I could think better. I could focus better. I could figure out how to say no to somebody if I had this drug out of my system. But I went through withdrawals again. And because of that, they thought I was depressed, and they took me into a therapist, and they told the therapist that I was sexually active. I wasn't. That I was on drugs, which was the opposite. I had attitude problems, which I probably did. I was a redhead. I was 15.
Yeah, right.
Right. And this therapist found out that my father and I had a very strained relationship, and she was kind of the Sigmund Freud mentality, where if you have an issue that is a repetitive issue, the source comes from your relationship with your parents. And this therapist, I'm not kidding you, she gave me prescriptions for Klonopin and Paxil and Prozac, which are mind-altering drugs for depression and anxiety.
Crap.
And then told me, if you want to have a good relationship with your father or any man afterward, you have to like what they like. You have to be the one to make the effort. Because if you don't, they're not going to. That's not how a man works. That's not how a man's brain works. It set me up to be exactly that chameleon.
Absolutely. You were told to be that. You were told 15. If you were going to be accepted, you had to become a chameleon.
And I was so proud every single time a new boy in school would tell me that they were in love with me or that they liked me, because it meant that I had done something right to be appealing to them.
And that's where our value is.
Yep.
Our value is when we're being accepted by these men.
Yep. And it hurt for a long time. Before I went to Scotland, this man that I had gotten to know over the 7-year period of time, I was living in Los Angeles. He was out there in Scotland. And he was part of my journey of discovering who I was. That's when it really hurt the most, going over there. I had gone from being an actress and a model, modeling for Harley Davidson. I was on Alias and Will and Grace and a couple other TV shows here and there out in LA. And it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I bet.
But I was again finding my sense of self-value in other people's and other people's perceptions of me. The more roles I got, the more I valued myself. That's not the way it should be. So I quit. I walked away from the industry completely. I was offered a recurring role in the final season of Will and Grace when it was on network television, and I turned it down. I walked away. And I went into the field of private security. Basically, I was a mall cop.
Well, that's a change.
Right?
Why a mall cop?
Because they were hiring.
Okay, got it.
And within 5 months, I had busted open a major embezzlement ring. I had taken down the director of security. I had become the liaison to the regional director who lived down in San Diego, actually. And he and I became very close. And I was suddenly the new director of public safety and security for 6 properties in LA County.
Oh my gosh. Did you just fall upon finding that? Or did you, I mean,
I
how did
listened
that
to
happen?
God.
There you go. There you go.
So I was a front door greeter at a Circuit City. Now I'm really dating myself.
Yeah.
But I had to check all the receipts on the way out. And one day this guy was abusing his kid in the store. And he sat on him and was smothering him in a chair and smacked him.
Oh my gosh.
I was boiling. And I called the local police department, and one of the security guards on the outside of the property, he heard this over his radio and he came swooping in out of nowhere. And this guy pulled right in behind this guy's car so that he was blocking him in so he couldn't leave. And he detained them there while he was waiting for the cops to show up. And the manager of the Circuit City came out and saw me and said, "You can't ever call the police without getting prior authorization and approval first." And it's like, you can't tell me that I'm not allowed to call when I see something physically happening to a child.
Yeah, that was horrific.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's against the law, by the way.
Yeah, right.
They're cannot tell your employees. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he threatened to fire me over it. So I went to the guy that was out there in the parking lot. The police had shown up and this guy was in custody. They're putting him in handcuffs. I'm talking to this guy that swooped in his patrol car. I was like, I am sick of what I'm doing now. I am sick of this job. I'm sick of this life. How do I do what you do? I want your job. And he said, if you're serious, I'll introduce you to the boss. And I got the job the next day.
Oh my gosh.
I quit Circuit City on Black Friday, halfway through my shift.
I bet they appreciated that. Oh, well.
I was so proud of myself. Talk about healthy boundaries.
Yeah, exactly. That probably did feel really good. I mean, that's empowering.
Yeah. So yeah, I'd done all of this work on myself, just trying to find my way in the world. I had my own apartment for the very first time. I didn't have roommates. I had a cat. I had a real life that I was establishing. I paid for my own car. I had a career. I got an $11,000 a year raise right before I left.
Wow.
I got raises for all of my employees across the board. I negotiated for all of this. I worked so hard for all of this. And I discovered that I had this inner strength that I never thought that I had. I was a warrior. And when I walked through that property, when I was in my uniform, people stood back and got out of my way. I am small. And they moved. And it made me feel strong. And I didn't need no man in my life. I didn't need no boyfriends. I didn't need anybody trying to manipulate me, is really what it was.
Yeah, you were tired of it.
Yeah. And then this man came along and did exactly that and got me to Scotland. It broke me. It broke my heart. I didn't trust people for so long. Yeah. And I tell people all the time, whenever I'm up on stages and stuff, I always brag about my husband now. Because there's no way that I could have ended up with anybody else on the planet, because my husband is kind and generous and thoughtful and courageous and brave. And he's patient with me. He's the most wonderful man. And I'll get up on stage and I'll talk about him. At the end, one day, we were on our way back home. My husband says, "I need to tell you something." Uh-oh. It's never a good way to start a conversation.
I know. Yeah, it makes your heart kind of skip a few beats.
Uh-oh. What is it? What's wrong? He told me, he says, in all my life, in all the years, in everything that I've done, and all the people I've known, you are the only person that has ever accused me of being patient.
Oh, seriously?
And he's not patient with anybody else.
Interesting.
Yeah. With me, it's a different world. And he said, we were talking about this just the other day. He said one of the reasons that happens, one of the reasons that exists, is because he's known so many people in his life that purposefully try to push his buttons.
Oh, yeah.
And I've never tried to purposely push his button.
And he sees that.
Yeah.
He knows that.
And he knows that all I really want is to love and to be loved.
Mm-hmm.
And he is more than willing to reciprocate.
Oh my gosh. You are amazing. I mean, what a great, I mean, it's so inspiring to hear all the stuff that you've done. I mean, the horrific things that you've been through and then what you've done with your life since then is amazing. And it's like, there's just, you don't even question it. Like you just feel like it's the right thing and then you just do it.
Yeah.
So how did you get there? Because I know for me, I'm there too for the most part, but for the longest time it was paralyzing, right? You couldn't make decisions, right? So how did you get to the point where you were just like, you know what? Yep, this feels right. I'm going to go do it. And you just do. And you're not only do you do it, but you're successful at it, very successful at it.
For a while, it was this, I didn't care if I lived or died.
Mm.
And that helped with the decision making in a big way because I was very indecisive for such a long time. I left Scotland on June 19th of 2011. And in February of 2013, so about a year and a half later, I took a job as a flight attendant.
Oh gosh.
And I was terrified of airplanes.
Okay. So you made yourself do this.
I didn't do it because I thought it would be cool. I did it because I had places to go and things to see before I died. And I was ready to take myself out once I got through with my bucket list. And nobody realized that. The whole reason I became a flight attendant was because I was suicidal. And it's shocking to a lot of people to realize that because this is the job that everybody covets and everybody wants. And I was at this interview with 450 people and there were only like 50 spots available. The fact that I got the job is absolutely a miracle.
Yeah.
That job changed so much about my life. I would go into these cities and the rest of my crew, they were what we call the slam clicks. They slam the door and click the lock and you won't see them again until it's time to fly.
Yeah.
I wanted to see these cities. I was terrified, but I needed to see the Space Needle in Seattle. So I found my way to the train. I got all the way to the Space Needle and I went to go see it. And I made it all the way back to my hotel by myself. I was very proud of myself. This was like the first real adventure on my own in a strange city. I was still scared, absolutely terrified. But I kept doing it over and over and over again. And I got to Wichita, Kansas, which is where my grandmother was born. And I walked 6 miles to go to the botanical garden because it was the only thing of interest that was actually open that day. And the rest of my crew refused to go. And I went and explored and got to see this area where my grandmother was born, where she was raised. I'd never been there. I got to travel all over the place because of this job. And I started writing down these stories that I was collecting of all the funny stuff that happened on my plane.
I bet you have some good ones.
Oh my gosh. The first book that I ever wrote was called 30 Synchronized Woodpeckers. And it's all about that funny stuff that happened my first year on the job. I had so much fun. And I did the job for 2 years, 3 months, 28 days. Not that I was counting. But in the end of that, I realized I was no longer suicidal and I didn't need it.
And you didn't have a fear of flying.
Yeah.
Right.
I had completely given up that fear. It didn't exist. I also had given up my fear of exploring cities that I'd never been to by myself.
Yeah, that's huge.
So that was probably the biggest thing for me was I made one decision that led me to 130 more decisions that whether or not I could make them was up to whoever was in control.
And you pushed through your fear. You did it in spite of your fear. And that kind of fear can be paralyzing, especially with what you've been through.
I mean, it was in my travels that I was trafficked. The first time I was trafficked, I was in Arizona. So I left and went all the way to Florida because that was as far as I could get away without having a passport. The second time I was trafficked, I was in Florida. So I went to California because that was as far as I could get away from Florida.
Mm-hmm.
The third time I was trafficked, I was in Scotland, and I've not been back since.
I can't
I've never
believe
been
you
back to
made
Florida
it.
since.
I can't believe you survived that. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
In Scotland. I mean, you have nobody around that knows you.
Right.
And he had complete control over you.
Right. He even had my passport, my debit card, all that stuff.
Whatever happened to him?
As far as I know, he still got his job. He is still a police officer working in the school systems in Scotland.
It's frightening. That is so frightening.
And I reported him. I actually have a letter hanging in a shadow box of all the stuff that I did that first year that kept me alive, because I really was in a bad shape. But in that shadow box is a letter that's from them that says that they saw no signs of abuse and they had no evidence against him.
Do you think it's because in Scotland they have different abuse laws than they were here? Like if that happened here, do you think that it would have a different outcome?
In 2011? No, I think the outcome would have been the same pretty much
Really?
anywhere. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that I was over the age of 18. People automatically assume that since you were over the age of 18, you were the adult making the decisions.
Right. Yeah, I mean, seriously, this whole area needs to be opened up, because even, and I'm not comparing these at all, but even in a narcissistic relationship, which there's a lot of narcissistic tendencies in here, right? Where they're
Right.
controlling you and there's no open evidence of what's going on, it's frightening.
Right. Absolutely.
They're very sneaky. They do stuff behind the scenes so nobody else sees it.
Right.
Except you.
And, I actually had somebody ask me the other day a really interesting question. They said, do you believe that any man is capable of doing what he did to you? And I said, well, first of all, it wasn't just men who abused me.
Oh yeah, there you go. There you go.
Yeah. And second of all, no, it takes a mental disorder to do
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
It could be narcissism. It could be sociopathy. It could be somebody who has tendencies of being a psychopath or having borderline personality disorder. There are a number of different diagnoses that could lead somebody to believing that this is something that they could get away with.
Right. I mean,
Something that's
seriously,
acceptable.
you don't think that way. I don't think that way. The normal person doesn't think that way. I have to believe that there's some kind of mental break or something, because I just have a hard time believing that I agree with you that just the average person could go and do this. No.
Right.
I think there has to be some kind of disorder. I agree.
Yeah. It has to be.
Yeah. So, wow. Amazing story. I mean, the hard part, hearing the hard part is one thing, but hearing what you've done since then is just amazing. I love it. And I'm sure that if we were to see your resume, there would be even more things on there that,
It's a little ridiculous.
I love it though.
I always win the 2 truths and a lie game.
I bet you do. Oh my gosh. Well, you have been such an inspiration. And I always ask this question now. What is it you would like to leave with our listeners?
Understand that what it is that whatever you've been through is not your fault, and the credit does not belong to the past. So, that saying, we've all grown up hearing it, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, is a lie. That was coined by Friedrich Nietzsche in the 1800s, not too long before he died in an insane asylum. We can
there
let
you
it go. The truth is that the strength is within you to get through it, or you wouldn't have gotten through it at all. That credit never belongs to the abuse, the abuser, the traumas. None of that made you stronger. You were already stronger. You just had to dig a little deeper to find it. So you got to stop reaching for those Band-Aids. Keep reaching for the shovels.
Very good. Yes, it's true. I mean, yeah, I never liked that saying. And yeah, trauma does not make you stronger.
Nope. If anything, you are adding a straw to a camel's back.
Yeah.
Eventually you build a mountain you cannot climb. It's okay to ask for help.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. This has been really great. And I love your story. And tell us your book one more time.
My autobiography is called Custom Justice. It's available primarily on Barnes & Noble, but you can also get it on Amazon, all kinds of online stores.
I'm going to have to get it. I'm going to have to read it. And then if anybody wanted to reach out to you, how could they reach you?
The easiest way is probably through Facebook, because I'm on Facebook more than I should be. And if I wasn't, I would write more than 2 books a year. But I also have a website, growthfromdarkness.com, and there's a contact form. There's even a setup to where you can set up a 30-minute meeting just to sit down and chat with me. No strings attached.
I love it. Yeah. Yeah. Because you have a lot of good insight. Well, thank you again so much. This has been great.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Lisa.